Welcome to the show. You have found Mason Street Retirement Insights, where every week we turn to our resident financial advisor, Sean Mason. He is the founder of Mason Street Wealth Management right here in Fresno. And he's been helping clients retire with confidence for years. He'd love to do the same for you. So he is here today to break down some of the biggest retirement topics for us. All right, Sean, let's jump right into it, because even when people think they're being careful, new risks can find their way into retirement plans without much warning. And we're starting to hear more about 401k plans potentially adding things like Bitcoin, private equity, even access to IPOs. Regulators and plan providers are actively exploring these options, but they come with higher risk, they come with higher fees, and less transparency than what most people are used to in your typical 401k. So, Sean, I'm curious your thoughts on this, especially for somebody in their 60s who's nearing or maybe even already in retirement. How should they be thinking about these newer investment choices? What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and we look at these as kind of the alternative asset classes or alternative investments. You know, the investment world, it's like technology. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly improving. And a lot of it's good. A lot of it's really good. And then some of it's not so good. So some of these new investment techniques, they really have a position in a portfolio to do some good things. But a lot of it could be smoke and mirrors. So it's really important to understand what's going on in there. There's a lot of these different strategies that are just destined to fail just because the inherent characteristics. Mm-hmm. You know, with any investment, you've got to make sure that you understand it. If you are choosing your own investment allocations, you got to understand fundamentals and understand what's really going on in those alternatives. And when I talk about understanding, you know, there's certain levels of understanding. Those of us that invest in Microsoft, we don't necessarily go in and look at the financials of Microsoft and understand every intricacy in that company. But there's a lot of credibility behind that company. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of information available. And so we rely on that information. If we were comparing investing in Microsoft to a startup company, you don't have that credibility. You don't have that history. And so you really want to dive in and understand what's going on within inside of that company before you invest in it. And the same thing is going on with these alternative investments. What makes it difficult is sometimes there's just not a lot of transparency. Often there's very little history. So you really got to go get in and apply fundamentals. You got to stay out of the hype and the headlines and make sure that you understand what you're investing in. You know, keep in mind that we've always got to know what the purpose of the investment is. We've got to understand what we're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And every investment is going to have a trade-off, and we got to know what those trade-offs are and make sure that it's worth it. Can we still reach the goal and what we're trying to accomplish, even with the trade-offs that are inherent within that investment? Make sure that it fits within your plan. And that's why we're always preaching. You know, that planning element is so important so that we understand what we're trying to use a particular investment for. Mm-hmm. And especially with these alternative investments, there's a lot of considerations. You know, you got to consider risk. Often they're highly inflated with fees. Be very careful with liquidity, because very often there's a lack of liquidity, meaning you're committing to several years within that investment. Mm-hmm. You also got to know regulation. How is a certain one of these funds or investment strategies regulated? And then how are taxes going to be affected? How is your tax liability going to be affected by utilizing one of these strategies? You know, being intentional about the positioning is really important. Think of it like maybe you're building a house and you've got to have that core foundational structure. And in that portfolio, it's the same. You've got to have those core traditional strategies, but maybe you can utilize some design features to enhance the house, and the same with the portfolio, enhance the portfolio with the alternatives, but you still got your strong foundation.
Well, I want to ask you this, Sean, because I feel like some people will hear about these new kinds of options inside their 401k, and they just assume, you know, well, it must be safe because it's allowed. But don't you think that's a dangerous assumption?
Yes, it's a really good point that you bring up because you never want to rely on regulation.
Yeah.
Regulation is not going to be there to back you up if things go south. That is for sure. We've seen this time and time again. It ends up in court litigation. Attorneys are who make all the money, and the investors typically are the ones that miss out.
If you had somebody new come and see you, they're in their 60s, and they don't have decades to recover from a mistake. They're retiring in the next 5-ish years. What's your biggest concern that you'd have if you saw things like crypto or private investments showing up in their retirement accounts if they're that close on the brink of retirement?
Yeah, I got to make sure that that investor or that family that I'm talking to understands why they're there, understands why those holdings are in the portfolio in the first place. Maybe they didn't even realize it was in the portfolio. Maybe they didn't understand the consequences of what could happen. And so just a clear understanding of why they're using those particular investments, what they're trying to accomplish, and did they know the consequences if things don't work out well for them.
Well, so timing does really matter here, because if you've got someone at 35 talking about this in their 401k and someone at 65, they really should not be thinking or taking risk in the same way, right? Timing is a huge factor when it comes to this.
Yeah, it really is. And even though somebody is close to retirement, we can still recognize that there's a portion of the portfolio that is probably not going to be spent or used for 10, 15, 20 years. So there might be a position for some of these riskier asset classes that they may need to have a little bit more time, like a 35 or 40-year-old would have. And so that's okay. It's just about proper positioning and ensuring that they understand the consequences.
Do you think sometimes people are chasing these types of investments because they've got FOMO, they've got that fear of missing out, even when the missing out might actually be the better, safer move for them?
Yeah, the hype gets to people. You said it. It's the FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Yeah.
But, once you really dive in and help them understand what those consequences are, what could happen, it seems like that the FOMO seems to subside a little bit.
Yeah.
And that hype dwindles.
And so I'm guessing, though, that you've then seen cases where people took on more complexity than they needed. Maybe it was because they feared missing out when simplicity would have actually served them better. And how do you talk them through that? How do those conversations go when you spot something that's not in their best interest?
Always understanding the perspective of when the money is going to get used. It's all about the timing of when the money in the portfolio is going to get used. It's the time horizon of each dollar that's most important. So then when you're looking at different types of investments for each dollar and you're considering what those horizons are, very often they're going to start recognizing what is right for them. It's just they needed the information. They needed the understanding of how those different types of investments perform, what the consistency is, how long they should expect to keep an asset class like that.
That is going to do it for us this week here on Mason Street Retirement Insights. As always, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back next week, same time, same place, with more great insight from Sean Mason, president of Mason Street Wealth Management. Take care.
Mason Street Wealth Management, MSWM, is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by MSWM on this show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Motivate Investments. Registration is not an endorsement by securities regulators. Investment advisory services are offered through Motivate Investments, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. By contacting us, you may be provided with information about insurance products, including annuities, offered through Sean A. Mason, California, insurance license number 0B54860. The firms are separate entities. Annuity guarantees rely on the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are not offered by Motivate Investments. Read your contract for restrictions, limitations, or penalties. MSWM is not licensed in all 50 states. To find out if MSWM is licensed in your state, please call 559-892-0002.